Okay, good morning and good afternoon to everybody, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. I want to just take this moment to give a very warm welcome to you and thank you for joining us in our 15th webinar in the Local and Subnational Government Information Webinar Series on the 20th of August 2020. At this point, I just want to make mention that these webinars are made possible with the support of the Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework EU Support Project. I just want to run through quickly a few of the House rules. All attendees will be muted and we kindly ask that you keep it that way. We are going to have two panels today, panel discussions, following which we will open the floor for some questions and discussion, time permitting. So we ask that you hold your questions until the end, or alternatively make use of the chat box throughout the webinar to ask your questions. It's fantastic to have you all with us and to gather virtually like this, and we are very excited. I just want to mention that this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available on our various websites and YouTube channels afterwards, and will also be made available along with the slide pack in a follow-up email to all those who have registered for the webinar. So today's topic, we're very excited to have a dialogue towards a green recovery and lessons learned from nature in the context of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. It's my pleasure to introduce in a second some of our panelists, but just briefly, we'll be featuring a few of my colleagues from ICLEI Africa and the ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Center. I will introduce them in more depth later on. But we also are thrilled to be joined by Dr. Rajan from the Kochi Municipal Corporation in India, as well as Mr. David Barlow, Senior Policy Officer in the city of Manchester. So it's our pleasure to have you with us. This webinar is brought to you on behalf of the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments, for which ICLEI is the focal point to the 3 UN Rio Conventions, including the Convention on Biological Diversity, which we will situate this webinar within. So in terms of situating the webinar in the overall program for the year, you'll see highlighted on your screen, this is the 20th of August session. And we encourage you to check out our website. We will share the link for that to register for the upcoming webinars for the rest of the year. And just to mention at this point that we will have a second session of this webinar later today at 3 p.m. South African time or Central African time, which will feature an entirely new panel of speakers. So we encourage you to join us for that as well. In terms of today's agenda, I've covered the welcome and introductions. We're going to have a presentation introducing the idea of vertical integration before diving into the panel discussions. And the first one will feature two very exciting projects, the Interact Bio project and the Urban Natural Assets project. And the second panel will turn to hear some insights and perspectives from our government representatives on the line. Following that, I've mentioned, we will open the floor for questions and discussions, and at that point, you're welcome to either type your question in the chat box or make use of the raise your hand function in the panel on the right. Thereafter, we will close. So just very quickly, those of you who join our webinars regularly will know that this is our roadmap timeline to COP15, and there have been no significant changes since the last time we met. Just to note that we are keeping our eye on the changing dates for SAPSA 24 and SBI 3, as well as the dates for the CBD COP15 in Kunming, China in 2021. Just to also draw your attention to where we are towards the end of the Edinburgh process, the formal Edinburgh process, although this process has developed a community of practice that will live on right up to COP15 with the soon to be released Edinburgh Declaration that will be made available shortly for signatures and support up until the COP. So I also just want to draw our attention to the 30th of September, the UN Summit on Biodiversity that is taking place in New York. So at this point, without further ado, I want to introduce Ingrid Quincia, Senior Manager for Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions and Program Manager at ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Center. And Ingrid is going to deliver a presentation on multi-level governance and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. She's no stranger to these webinars. And Ingrid, it's always wonderful to have you with us. So with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tim. And if you can just move across to the next slide, please. Well, we actually have a very interesting webinar today. We're looking at it from a slightly different perspective when we talk about our advocacy roadmap, because we're wanting to explore a little bit how in practice and also through various actions and projects, the whole concept of whether you call it multi-level governance or vertical integration has materialized and has been operationalized within the biodiversity space. So the idea of the sort of applying biodiversity protection and conservation across levels of government or multi-level governance is not new within the CBD, the convention. In fact, it's embedded in what we call the ecosystems approach. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I just want to sort of highlight a few things about this ecosystems approach. It's essentially the primary framework for action under the convention, and it sets out a sort of a loose strategy around the integrated management of land, water, and living resources, both within the ecosystem context, but also within a governance context. And it helps then in that way to promote the sort of achievement and operationalization of all three of the objectives of the CBD. So in terms of its being formalized as an approach, an accepted approach within the CBD and its implementation, there's the decision 5 number 6, which was adopted at the Conference of Parties in 2000. And with that came a set of operational guidance and interlinked and complementary principles. Now, these principles are important because Principle 2 specifically speaks to the issue of governing or regulating the management of biodiversity and ecosystems across all levels of government. And the principle says that management, obviously, of ecosystems and biodiversity should be decentralized to the lowest appropriate level. And that is important because what it's essentially doing is it's the principle of that decentralized management will have greater efficiency gains, it'll be more effective, it's more equitable. And the idea is that the closer you are in terms of managing the ecosystem to where the ecosystem is, the greater the level of responsibility, ownership, accountability, participation, etc. And also things like use of local knowledge, citizen involvement, stakeholder involvement are possible. Tim, could you move to the next slide, please? So what I want to do now is to have a look at how this principle of the ecosystems approach has been applied across the implementation of the convention. And you'll see on the screen there that there have been numerous decisions since 2000 that have specifically recognized the fact that there are local and subnational levels of government, and they're important to the implementation of the convention. There's a very important decision that was taken in 2010, which we know as Decision 1022, and this endorsed also a plan of action on subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities, and it spelled out a sort of framework for how those subnational levels of government should be involved in the implementation of the convention, and specifically also encouraged the national level of government to support and enable and to involve those subnational levels of government in the convention. And then a very unique thing about the CBD is that it actually set up a mechanism for involving subnational levels of government, and that is through the Global Partnership on Local and Subnational Action for Biodiversity, which is endorsed in this Decision 1022 2022, and it comprises of 2 advisory committees, one that focuses on cities and local governments, and the other one on subnational. And there are other decisions as well, but what I want to highlight is that also the NBSAPs was seen as a very important instrument for multi-level governance, and there's been a number of guidelines developed on this. For example, in the photo that you have on your screen, there's a guideline that specifically addresses the issue of not just NBSAPs, but looking at it from a multi-level governance perspective. So we talk about coordination and collaboration across all aspects of implementation and management of ecosystems. Next slide, please. These are just some more of the decisions that have been taken. I'm not going to go into detail. If anybody wants to have more information, you're welcome. There are contact details at the end of the webinar. You're welcome to engage with us. But you can see that there's been the steady flow of endorsing this concept of multi-level governance in the implementation of the convention since 2000. Next slide, please, Tim. So what I want to do now is just look at where we are and where we're going to. So as you all know, we are in the process of developing and negotiating a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And in fact, within the theory of change of this new framework, which will be adopted at COP15, the whole concept of vertical integration or multi-level governance stands central. And it assumes what we call a whole of government and a whole of society approach to those transformative changes that are needed over the next 10 years and even forward as we move towards the 2020-50 vision. And we've seen also that not just within the GBF, the framework, in terms of the specific enabling measures that are being considered and the means of implementation. For example, the long-term approach to mainstreaming, the LTAM. Vertical integration is a fundamental principle and also forms one of the building blocks of the mainstreaming approach that's being put forward under this new framework. So also with something like the monitoring framework, and there's a number of other instances like, for example, capacity building, etc. Tim, if you can move to the next slide. So if we step back a little bit from the convention and its processes and look to see what the local and subnational government constituency are saying and calling for, I think the Edinburgh process has been sort of seminal in this whole respect, in that we've gathered together through the Edinburgh process, which built on a number of processes that ICLEI and its partners such as Regions 4 and the Goals Group and the European Committee of Regions, and indeed many of the cities and states around the world. For example, earlier this year, there was a very important conference that was held in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, looking at what it is that the subnational levels of government are wanting and are calling for. In the Edinburgh process, everything has come together, and so there are 3 main outcomes of this process. The one was very specific comments and suggestions and recommendations made on the zero draft of the framework, on the monitoring framework, etc., but also, as Tim mentioned, the Edinburgh Declaration. And I really want to encourage as many cities as possible who are listening in today to sign up to the declaration. It is going to be made available on the website. And there's a long period in which you can sign up and take it through your various council procedures, as well as obviously not just cities, but also provinces and states, etc. And essentially what this constituency is calling for is that there wants to be more than just recognition of the fact that subnational governments at all levels are part and parcel of government, and we want to see an inclusion of this recognition and also optimization of the contribution and the roles and the mandates that you have at the constituency level can have and how that can plan out and contribute to the achievement of the new framework. Mainstreaming is a very, very important thing. And as well as the issue of resource mobilization for greater investment at the local and subnational levels. Awareness raising, education, the whole monitoring and reporting, and how what happens at the subnational levels can then feed into a national and obviously then also achieving global targets. capacity building, and also importantly, support for networks such as ICLEI and Regions 4, etc., as ways in which the voice of the local and subnational governments are heard and articulated. The next slide, please. Thank you. And this is my last slide, and I'm hoping this is going to sort of lead into the panel discussion. What all this has to do with the questions we're asking now is that I've given you a bit of a snapshot of the history and where we currently are in terms of the policy and the thinking and the approaches around multi-level governance or vertical integration. And I'm stressing the fact that it's an integral part of this convention, and it's quite unique actually in that way in the family of conventions, the Rio Conventions. But the proof lies in the pudding. So what we're wanting to do is, through the experience that we've had with our projects, is to reflect on how it's actually been operationalized. What are the lessons been? What have some of the challenges been? What are the practical aspects? And this is important as we stand now going forward, where we're going to have to implement a new framework in a particular context, which is colored or through the lens of a new normal. We're having to rebuild and build back better, and we talk about a green recovery. And how can these lessons that we've learned, how can they shape and influence and inform our plans and our preparations for implementing our new framework? Thanks very much, Tim.
Great, thank you, Ingrid, and thank you for being with us today. I think you've set the scene so well and laid the foundation for our panel discussions, which I am going to dive into without further ado. I think that, as Ingrid has said, it's really important to situate the work of cities and show these demonstrations within the context of the post-2020 framework, especially at this time now where issues of nature conservation are really being brought to the fore. And we're, in a sense, campaigning for nature to be central to the recovery following the global pandemic. So it's really my pleasure to introduce our first two panelists, and I'll ask them to turn their videos on if they haven't already. We are joined today by Dr. Anita van Beek, Senior Professional Officer for Social Ecological Systems at ICLEI Africa. And also Ms. Jessica Kavanagh, Senior Professional Officer for Climate Change and Urban Natural Assets at ICLEI Africa. So Anita and Jess are really responsible for driving some amazing projects, and that is really the topic of this first panel. So if I can firstly turn to perhaps Jess, Jess wondered if you could give us a 1-minute introduction to the Urban Natural Assets project before we kick off with some of the panel questions.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. So yeah, Urban Natural Assets for Africa, or UNA for short, has been working in 9 African cities for 7 years. So it's got quite a legacy behind it. And the main aim of the program is to mainstream nature and nature-based solutions or nature considerations into land use planning and decision making. So that's the forefront of designing and planning future cities.
Fantastic. We look forward to hearing more on what the project has been doing. Anita, if I can come to you, if you could just give a very brief introduction to the Interact Bio project, please.
Sure, Tim, thank you very much, and greetings to everybody on the call. Yes, so the Interact Bio project is a 4-year project which is coming to a close around about the end of this year, and it's funded by the German government through the EU Ministry. And very much in some ways like the UNA project, it's a mainstreaming initiative. And the way we look at mainstreaming in the Interact Bio project is through really to take a multi-pronged approach and to say there are several mechanisms by which one could mainstream. And so it includes sub-initiatives like investment cases, like local biodiversity strategies and action plans, and demonstration projects where we actually install and implement changes on the ground in the cities. So I hope that's a good enough introduction, Tim.
That's great. Thanks, Anita, and thanks both for being with us. We really appreciate your contributions. So I'm going to turn to you first, Jess. And I wonder if you could share some insights with us in terms of how the UNA project cities are engaging with their national governments. Yeah, I wonder if you can just talk to, and tell us a bit about some of the innovation that the project has brought about with regards to multi-level governance.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. That's a very, very broad question. So I think I'll start with the fact that I think UNA and its project cities have really prioritized multi-level engagements. So that's bringing local and national government into the room, sometimes for the first time, to really unpack and discuss these issues and really try and chart a way forward for nature mainstreaming and to build that collaboration between those governance spheres. But what's been quite unique in the UNA program has been the approach that we've used in those multi-level engagements. So it hasn't been a typical kind of engagement or workshop style. It's really been about using principles like co-production, knowledge generation, reflection, learning to really kind of come together and discuss things. Because what we've learned is that it's very difficult to look at a decision-making pathway and find entry points for mainstreaming. What you really have to do is co-create those entry points. And so that's why we've been prioritizing those softer elements of change, the co-production and the knowledge generation, because through those processes, these kind of emergent entry points for mainstreaming are coming together and are emerging, which has probably been the most profound way that we've been able to build that multi-level governance in the project cities. And yeah, so the innovations that are coming out is really an array of games that we use, different tools, and different kind of facilitation styles to really get that co-production. And yeah, it's quite fun to see mayors step out of their role as mayors and engage with local government through game playing and through role playing and through all these other kind of props that we have in our workshops, which is quite exciting. But just quick two things to note about this multi-level governance and how we are trying to build it in our cities is we've noticed in a few of our countries, there's the Ministry of Local Government, which are absolutely critical for ensuring collaboration between local and national government. But sometimes they are representative of the local government. So they are part of these task teams, and they say that local government is being accounted for because the Ministry of Local Government is there. So we're also really trying to break that kind of norm down and make sure that local government is actually represented themselves and not through the Ministry of Local Government. And then the last kind of point of multi-level governance is trying to really link local actions to multiple national planning mechanisms. So not just your NBSAPs, but also things like your NDCs, your nationally determined contributions, and your disaster risk reduction strategies, and the water strategies, all these different national planning mechanisms, and trying to integrate nature into all of them so that there's a holistic approach to mainstreaming of nature.
Great, thank you, Jace, for those insights. And I think you're spot on that. And if I can turn to Anita now to reflect on some of the mainstreaming in Interact Bio. Anita, I wonder if you could just give us some insights on how vertical integration has been implemented through the project, and maybe what are some key lessons going forward to enable more effective vertical integration, especially in the context of the post-2020 framework and the moment we find ourselves in now.
Sure, thanks, Tim. So as I mentioned, the Interact Bio project is actually a Global South project. So it was implemented in 3 countries in the Global South, Brazil and India and Tanzania. So I will speak about our experience in Tanzania. That's where I've been most closely involved. So I think the best example of vertical integration that we implemented in Tanzania and in the city of Dar es Salaam was the LBSAP, the local biodiversity strategy and action plan. So this is Tanzania has an NBSAP, and it's had one for a while, but it doesn't have any LBSAPs, so it doesn't have any local biodiversity strategies and action plans. So we developed one, we co-developed one with the Ilala municipality, which is a municipality within the city of Dar es Salaam. The city of Dar es Salaam is really big. It's got 5 municipalities, and this was one of them. So we co-developed with municipal officials, with city officials. We co-developed this biodiversity strategy and plan. And I would say one of the really neat vertical integration aspect of this co-production process was we had the local government there, and the city government and the regional government and other stakeholders such as universities and NGOs. But I think a really neat aspect that happened in this process is we got somebody from the Vice President Office, Environment Division, which is responsible for the NBSAP implementation at the national level, to join all the co-production workshops. And that was really, I think, instrumental in the process, because I think the link between local, regional, and national has not always been that strong. And suddenly, people were able to have conversations about the links between local, regional, and national, and how those decision-making processes align in terms of the NBSAP and the LBSAP. And initially, I think the local government stakeholders were a little bit shy, but because we ran a workshop series, I think they really started to engage with the national government more, and those conversations really got interesting, and it led to interesting debates, and I think they really enjoyed having the national voice there. So I think what we saw there was really a champion at the national level that we could engage with, and that we could really lean on, and she was there throughout the process. I think that was really important. I think the point I can make in terms of improvement, so I think what we relied on there was a bit of a strategy of, in this LBSAP process, was to really lean heavily on this aspect of champions. So we found a champion in the national office, which was fantastic. But I think what that also tells you is, I think that being a champion, I think that's a little bit of an informal, relying on an informal relationship building process. And I think what we could do in the future is to provide support and strengthen more formal institutional processes and the institutional capital and capacity to absorb kinds of strategies as part of biodiversity strategy. So I think it worked really well, but I think what we can improve is to continue working with the champions, the local and the national and regional champions, but at the same time look to where can we improve the formalized institutional processes and capacities to I would say, to sustain that integration across the levels over a longer period, because sometimes champions can be redeployed and moved elsewhere, and so and that does happen actually quite often. We've been lucky that we've been spared a lot of that, but in this case, but I think you get formalized institutional processes strengthened. I think that would be really something that we should look for, towards. And I would be quite interested if anybody has any ideas around how that could be done. And I'm also well aware that we could learn quite a lot also from projects like the UNA program, who have been working in a similar space. Thanks, Tim.
Great, thanks Anita for your sharing those lessons with us. I'm going to turn to Jess again. We're at a critical moment now where the spotlight has been shone on the unprecedented loss of biodiversity. And as we enter the new decade, obviously we have the post-2020 framework coming into effect, and as well as the decade of ecosystem restoration, the UN decade next year. So Jess, I wonder if you could just reflect in what ways the Urban Natural Assets Project is supporting cities to contribute to this restoration effort, and really to enhance the contributions of nature to people in the cities that it's worked in.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. As I started, I said that UNA's been running in 9 different cities over 7 years. It's also a needs-based project, so we're very, very strong at prioritizing what the city needs, and they kind of will tell us, and then we try and support that city need. So it's opened up a huge amount of wealth of support activities, actually, because it's been running for so long across so many cities, and because it's needs-based. So we have struggled in the past to communicate the immense amount of value that this program has been achieving. So I hope I'll do it justice, but I've kind of summarized it into 4 kind of key categories. So the first one is at a policy level. So we, I'll show you through case studies. So the first one is in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam. So we've been working very closely with the Interact Bio project there, and been working with the Vice President's office there and the Ministry of Lands to help them with recommendations for their upgrade of their 2007 planning guidelines, mainly from nature-based solutions or nature considerations and a climate change lens. So those 2 kind of key kind of crises, I guess, are very much integrated into the future planning guidelines. So that's one way. Another way at the policy level is in the city of Kampala. The country at the moment is really prioritizing their disaster risk reduction strategy and action plans. There's multiple cities in Uganda that are really driving this process and developing these plans. And UNA has supported the integration of nature-based solutions into that plan, so that you're not having just hard infrastructure as kind of the key outcome to build resilience and build disaster risk reduction strategies. So that's another way at the policy level that UNA has been supporting. We've also been doing quite a lot of work at a planning level. So in the Longwe City Council, which is in Malawi, we've been supporting them with data, so baseline information, and also prioritization exercises. So what urban natural assets are important to their cities, what natural green open spaces, if they lose, will really kind of influence the resilience, the broader resilience of their city. For example, temperature will increases, health considerations, waste management, all those things that nature is providing for free. And so trying to prioritize that so that the city really plans with nature, and that they have this in line with development control and urbanization challenges in the cities. So providing decision-making tools at a local level for planning. We've also helped at a coordination level. So really trying to establish sustained processes of engagement between different actors in our cities. That's through developing forums or providing engagement spaces or dialogues, working between trying to formalize relationships between academic researchers and city councils. So on a coordination level, doing quite a lot with all the different cities. And then the last level is community level. So UNA is really great at trying to work with communities, not only bridging the divide between communities and cities, so trying to get communities' voices very much heard in city planning, and also cities to work with communities, but implementing on the ground with communities. We have 10 on-the-ground implementation projects, or what we call on-the-ground implementation projects, from various scales, from using art and culture for songs and murals, to actually greening initiatives and bank restabilization in rivers, and using various important biodiversity as ecological buffer zones on wetlands in Uganda. So all kinds of on-the-ground implementation, but really working with communities to ensure that these on-the-ground initiatives have legs long after the UNA program is wrapping up in those cities, because UNA is all about creating legacy so that the work continues. And I think that's very important in terms of the place that we find ourselves in, is ensuring that there's a legacy that others can pick up the mantle and walk with the work that you're doing on the ground.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you, Jace, for sharing those amazing innovations. And we look forward to keeping an eye on the UNA project, all of us on this webinar, I'm sure, and seeing what it will deliver in the post-2020 era to build on all of these fantastic initiatives you shared with us today. So Anita, if I come back to you, can you tell us about some of the innovations that have emerged from the Interact Bio project with regards to ecosystem services, and nature's contributions to people, specifically, as we situate ourselves in the context I described just before Jace spoke of rapid loss, but also opportunity with the coming in of the post-2020 framework. Over to you. Anita?
Hello, Tim. Sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good. Sorry about that. So I'll just talk about some of the experiences from Interact Bio, and I think one of the sort of early interventions we had there was when we spoke to the city about what their needs are. We had a very interesting conversation around greening, and what they said was that they have a long history of greening in the city, and then they have a municipal budget allocation for the year. But it's quite small, but they can do something with it. And what they wanted from us is some support in terms of strategizing where to allocate that money spatially, because they said they have this money every year, but the city is huge. Where spatially do they position? Where do they put their money? Where do they plant trees? Where do they plant vegetation? Where do they green? And So we use an ecosystem services approach to come up with a product which we finally called the Thematic Atlas. And what it really is it's an ecosystem services approach to saying what are the ecosystem services and the benefits of urban green space, and how does that overlay with urban problems such as flooding, such as pollution, such as reduced livelihood, such as what with some of the biodiversity loss which we spoke about. So what we did was we worked with map layers, and we said, right, let's say we overlay ecosystem services layer and map all the greening and the ecosystem services provided by greening together with, for example, urban issues such as flooding and heat. So, for example, if you were to overlay a heat map of Dar es Salaam with green space, what they found was that the hottest and most polluted parts of the city are not green. So that already gives you a clue as to where you should invest in your greening. So suddenly, spatially, they start to see patterns emerge. And I think so just to say also, the atlas is available. You can download it from the Interact Bio website. And it's a neat product, because I think one of the really, really neat things about it is it's very, very simple. The principles are very simple. It's simple to use. And I think for a city like Dar es Salaam, they didn't have sophisticated GIS and spatial layers and lots of data. It's not a data-rich environment necessarily, but we created simple maps from which you could infer really, really clear patterns, and I think that really excited them. I think that was a major lesson in this one, is you don't need sophisticated data to create these patterns and to see them and to be able to inform decisions around greening, and understanding how greening helps to not just provide aesthetic effect and aesthetic impact, but actually help you with issues such as heat and climate change impacts as a result of climate change and flooding. So I think the city decision makers started to see, oh my gosh, greening is actually really useful for a couple of things, for multiple reasons, and this atlas helped them justify those stories and create defensible arguments as to where they're going to put their money. Another, just a quick spin-off of the thematic atlas, which I was very, very happy about, is so in every chapter of the atlas there's a list of policy recommendations, and this was co-produced with a bunch of stakeholders. And incidentally, this process was also very much influenced by the UNA principle of co-production and co-creating. So it was a wide stakeholder process. But one of the policy recommendations that came out of the atlas, which I think is great, is a recognition that the need for the city to understand what their natural heritage is. For example, in previous years, they always would, the way they would apply their minds to greening was to buy exotic trees, and most of their nurseries in the city cultivate and grow and sell exotic plants. So a spin-off of the atlas was to put money into the creation and development of a biodiversity atlas, a biodiversity catalogue for the city. And what this means is that there will be information available about the indigenous species that can be cultivated and planted in the city, and that forms part of the very special biodiversity hotspot that the city sits in, which is the East African coastal forests. So they're starting to develop an awareness of the natural heritage, the indigenous natural heritage, and starting to think about, oh, gee, we could, instead of planting an exotic tree, we could select one of our own coastal forest species and start to regenerate some of that natural heritage that is really theirs, and that there are remnants of it left in the city, but they're fast disappearing. So we're hoping with a product like this, we can start to change the mindset, change the way they plant and select their plants. Yeah. So I think that those are some of the innovations that we think were quite neat about the thematic atlas.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anita. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank both panelists for being with us today and sharing your fantastic insights. And just to let all attendees know, we will definitely be sharing links to the various documents that have been mentioned, as well as the project websites for you to go and check them out and follow the journey from here. So thank you, a huge thank you to both of you for being with us today. We really appreciate it. And without further ado, I'm going to turn to our second panel. And we really have it's my honor and privilege today to introduce Dr. Rajan Chedambath, the director of the Center for Heritage, Environment and Development, Research Development Wing of the Kochi Municipal Corporation, and also Mr. David Barlow, Senior Policy Officer, Lead for Green Infrastructure and Biodiversity in the City of Manchester Policy Team. It's wonderful to have you both with us. I think we've heard fantastic examples and insights from the African context, and now we, in a sense, going to do a bit of a tour of the world. Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce both our panelists, and without further ado, I'm going to dive into some questions. So Dr. Rajan, if I come to you first, you know, how has COVID-19 highlighted the critical links between nature and human health and well-being in the city of Kochi at this time? And how does the city plan to strengthen these links in the future? Obviously balancing and acknowledging that this is in a context with other multiple challenges in your city.
Yeah, Timothy, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part, part of this very important discourse. Well, like to begin with, I will have to just make the historic context correct in the Kochi scenario. Well, we've been a fast-growing city in South Asia, and some 100 years back, like, you know, the city morphology was something like 70% water and wetland, and 30% built area or built land area. And in the last 100 years, there has been real change, and now we are like a reversal of, like, you know, landforms, the land morphology. Like, we are only 30% wetland and water body, and rest 70% area is built up. So like, you know, how this transformation, this morphological transformation has really affected the nature, humans, and well-being that's something which I'm going to kind of introspect over here. Well, in this process of, like, you know, morphological change, we lost all critical elements of, like, you know, quality living, of livability, or in other words, livability. For instance, water, then air, soil, and food. And like, you know, the city lost all these critical 4 elements in this process of urbanization in the last 100 years. And now we have this pandemic situation. Hello? Yeah. Am I audible? Some issues?
There we are.
Hello?
We apologize for that. I'm sure what happened.
Yeah. So then we have this situation of pandemic. Like, just before even before pandemic, like, you know, we were facing like a serious, like, you know, man-made disasters, like other disasters like flooding, etc. The city is almost on the mean sea level, and like and any slight change in the sea level or any rise in the sea level would inundate, like, a huge part of the city. And then we have like this monsoonal issues, change in the pattern, monsoonal pattern. Like, we have kind of short, high intensity rainfalls, and then, like, in summer we have heat islands being formed. So like and on top of it, like, we have the COVID-19 situation, and people and we've been advocating, like, in a sustainable way of living all these years, but, like, you know, there were many takers for that, because, like, you know, development is something else over here. Like, you know, it's always, like, you know, big buildings, you know, flyovers and whatnot. Like, you know, the whole notion of development is, like, you know, quite away from the sustainable future or sustainable way of development. So this pandemic has come as a big opportunity for us. First of all, like food, people started realizing that if you really depend upon outside areas outside the city for food, in this kind of situation, you will be in serious trouble. And the city now depends a lot on other areas for its water. And in this kind of situations, like in a pandemic kind of situation, flood kind of situation, you wouldn't have enough water. And air quality, again, is a major issue. So this pandemic has taught the whole population that we will have to have our own solutions and our own natural based solutions. So now we are seriously thinking into addressing it through our own way, through our own strength. For instance, for water, why don't you recharge? Kochi is a place where you get at least 300 mm rainfall in the monsoonal time, and why don't you kind of recharge this water? Why don't you harvest that water? How you kind of recharge the groundwater level so that you will have enough water in the city itself, you are self-sustained in that aspect. And food, then focus a lot on and invest a lot on urban farming and rooftop farming, and use your public spaces for farming, and be self-sufficient in farming and food security aspect as well. So and we are finding local solutions for our local problems with the support of the people. People all of a sudden started realizing that if we go in this way, this way of the ethos of non-certainty, or the culture of greed will not take you anywhere. You'll have to be very sustainable in your way. You'll have to be need-based. And this has taught us a lot of lessons. The COVID situation has taught us a lot of lessons, and even this Interact Bio project, which is being implemented in the city now, got a lot of impetus, saying that we really need to conserve our biodiversity. We really need to really look into our own kind of solutions, and we need to have our own resources within the city premises. Yeah, that's the beginning note I have, Timothy, for the.
Great, thank you, Dr. Rajan, and thanks for sharing these insights. I think you've touched on a very critical, the notion of the nexus, and how nature is critical from a food perspective, a water perspective, and it's great to hear some of the innovations and the solutions that you have been developing in Kochi. So if I turn to you now, Dave, can you share with us some insights around your city's involvement in global projects such as the H2020 projects, and how these have accelerated your transition to a greener city, which we know in this time is very critical. And maybe in your response, you could touch on some of the elements around mobilizing resources for nature-based solutions. So thanks for being with us, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Timothy, and welcome everybody from a very sunny and lovely Manchester here in the north of England. Just a little bit of background. I'm a policy officer, and I've been an environmental manager for the municipality for the city of Manchester for over 30 years. And I've recently seen a step change really in the way we have taken natural environment strategies and turned policy into practical action. And I think the beauty of some of the global initiatives that we're involved with allow us to showcase best practice approaches and really help to develop a really strong evidence base around the importance and value of nature-based solutions. Manchester, within its context, has about 550,000 people living within the city. It's a fast-growing population with a relatively fast-growing economy outside of London, and it's part of a fast-growing city region. Within the city region, probably around 3 million people live, but the city of Manchester, about 550,000 people. In 2009, we produced our first climate change action plan called Manchester A Certain Future, and that was really important for us because, as one of the first industrial cities, we thought it was important to have that step change, that if we could do it, if we could adapt, then anybody could do it. And using terms like green infrastructure, ecosystem services, nature-based solutions. These aren't common terms that our citizens are aware of. So we had to use ways to actually take our communities and our citizens along with us on that journey. And what Horizon 2020 funding in particular allows us to do is to demonstrate practically what nature-based solutions can mean on the ground to communities. So we're lucky, we have an award-winning green infrastructure strategy for the City of Manchester, and that was instrumental in us receiving our Horizon 2020 funding bid because it demonstrated a strategic alignment with what the requirements were for Horizon 2020 and what the city's vision was in relation to its drive towards being a greener, more inclusive city. And what we wanted to demonstrate was that it wasn't necessarily about having a lot more green infrastructure. We are in a deeply urban environment in Manchester. Around 48% of the city is covered by non-man-made surface. But what we wanted to demonstrate was that it was important for us to show how we improved the quality and function of our existing landscape and our existing landscape features. We have lots of parks, we have lots of river valleys, but they're not always of a really high quality. They're not always functioning to their highest potential. In 2015, we led on a Horizon 2020 bid called Grow Green, which looked at looking at nature-based solutions to promote climate resilience, in particular heat stress and flooding. And we were successful within that bid. So we led a 6-city consortium with 23 partners across Europe, not just Europe. We also had we have 5 European cities plus Wuhan in China who were involved with, to demonstrate those best practice examples that really brought to life the importance of nature-based solutions. And literally in the last few weeks, we've opened a demonstrator in Manchester, the city's first climate resilient park in a deeply urban neighborhood of the city, and it's been incredibly well received. Local citizens, you know, their quotes were, "We just can't believe how fantastic this is." So we're able to demonstrate why doing things differently, one, doesn't need to cost more, but two, can have all these multiple benefits that nature-based solutions can bring. All these ecosystem services benefits can be demonstrated in microcosm in a small, focused community park. So that's really, really important for us. And those showcasing opportunities will continue because our Horizon 2020 partners are all coming online with their active demonstrators. But as well as that, there's just this ongoing long-term analysis and monitoring that's going to gauge the demonstrator's success. So I think being able to demonstrate practically how these things can make a difference, if they do make a difference, is really important. I think politically, the City of Manchester has declared climate emergency. What nature-based solutions can provide is a positive response to that. To actually say we can contribute to COVID recovery in a big way. The landscape can come to the fore and can help us on that journey. So Horizon 2020 is one way. Another project that we're involved with is called Ignition, and that tries to answer the holy grail question as regards how do we fund this stuff sustainably into the long term when there are so many demands on cities for other priorities. Manchester has got all those additional demands. So how do we demonstrate that there is a need and also an opportunity to do things differently in relation to funding? So we're looking at, you know, are there opportunities with other markets to invest in green infrastructure, to look at public-private finance models, to be able to look at doing things differently, that there's a cost-saving element to investing in nature-based solutions. One of the ways we're doing that is creating a living lab, which will demonstrate some of the practical benefits that nature-based solutions can have as opposed to normal grey solutions, a permeable surface as opposed to a road, a green wall as opposed to a hard wall, or a green roof and a solid roof. So we'll be able to demonstrate that practically. And I think we're excited about the Ignition project. It's a 3-year project that's just started. It's just in its first year, but that will hopefully unlock some of the mysteries of how we finance nature-based solutions in the future. So I'll leave it there for now. Timothy?
Great. Thanks so much, Dave, for sharing those insights. It's fantastic to hear of the work that's being done in Manchester, and also the work that's being done in Kochi. So Dr. Rajan, if I come back to you, I wonder if you could share some insights with us around some of the emerging plans and innovations for scaling up nature-based solutions in the context of the post-2020 framework and vertical integration. You know, how is the city of Kochi making the case for investing in nature and showing that makes good business sense, and yeah, monitoring your progress in that regard? Over to you.
Timothy, first of all, I would deal with the aspect of power. Like, you know, so right now we are depending more on like hydroelectricity coming from far off places. And like Kochi is like, as I said, like, you know, we have heat islands in the summer, and we have like a scorching sun. We have got a lot of solar power, and it's not been really tapped well. And that's one area we are going to really focus a lot. And in another 5 years, 10 years, we want to reduce the conventional energy use and like to 30%, and bring in kind of alternative energy like solar. And I don't know whether wind power is really possible. I don't really know about the investment part, but solar energy, of course, we are on a mission, and we have a lot of private players investing. We have a lot of government schemes kind of for solar energy, and certainly, like, you know, that is one kind of a natural based solution for our energy need. And second is like in the pollution aspect, like there is a high level of pollution. We always thought that, like, you know, the western wind would take all the air pollution towards the east, but like I don't think that is really possible now because of so many reasons. And now we got to really build in our own system to fight air pollution. And forestry is one, urban forestry is one kind of answer to that. And we are like investing a lot on urban forestry. In fact, Bio is there is an Cities for Forest project happening, and we are trying to build a lot of Miyawaki forest in the city, so that like carbon dioxide is like, you know, absorbed, and house gas emission is kind of reduced, sort of a thing. So like we, it's like our context is quite different from the kind of developed urban centers. We are a developing urban center, a developing economy, and we will have to really balance things. Like we cannot really implement things without the support of the people, and people will have to be really convinced about the need to go slow on our development kind of like, you know, path. Like we'll have to really show kind of slow down the built area, the big construction, huge constructions like, you know, flyovers and malls and sort of a thing. And then the other aspect is like Kochi, as I said, is a water-based society, city, and we are on the one of the biggest Ramsar site. That's the Vembanad Lake, and we have many rivers and canals flowing through the city. And over the last 30 years, not in the last 100 years, over the last 30 to 40 years, and we have kind of encroached upon almost all these water bodies, like from the biggest kind of backward to the river, to the canal. And this pandemic and the kind of flooding and all due to the climate change is really helping us to convince the people that we will have to kind of regain our canal system. We will have to regain our backwater. And now people are slowly willing to kind of give up the land they reclaimed. They have slowly started giving up or helping the city to widen the canal network. They built houses right on it. So kind of this kind of like solutions, like an inbuilt natural solution is, and then we could really convince the people we have solution, natural based solution, our own solution, locally grown solution for all the urban woes, and our urban areas have never kind of witnessed planned growth. It's all like sporadic kind of growth. It's kind of unplanned growth. It's like firefighting kind of growth, that you need something today, over here you build that, you need a bridge today, you build it, and next day you want it, you demolish. That's a kind of, it's never based on a master plan or a structural plan or a comprehensive plan or a long-term plan. So and in such a scenario, we always look towards west or wherever for our development kind of aspirations. But now we are like very grown. We are looking for homegrown solutions, and we are like deliberating a lot on like biodiversity coming as a solution for your climate change resilient plan. We never thought like biodiversity would be a very major element in your climate resilient plans. Canals. So that for 10 years back, we had a study conducted by the Oak Ridge National Lab on the impact of sea level rise on Kochi, and they said like you really need to kind of work on all your canals. You got to bring all the lifeline of Kochi are your canals, and you have to give life to it. You have to bring it back all of them to their older the real self. Some of them are like some of them are 45 kind of feet in width. And now they are only like 5 to 10. You have to bring it back to the old self, and people who are not quite agreeing to that. They are quite reluctant to accept that kind of terminology or ideas. And now, like after witnessing like 2 consecutive years of flooding due to climate change, and now this years of a pandemic, people are thinking that we'll have to. People started believing that we'll have to tread to a new course of development. We will have to really go by the old kind of doctrine of like need-based society, not greed-based society. We will have to really put a full stop on our the kind of development paradigm, the kind of development that we are like witnessing in our cities, in our urban centers. In a nutshell, we will have to go back to our village kind of setup where nature and development lived in harmony with each other. Both of them kind of, we have real model, surviving existing model in our own context. If you really travel 50 kilometers towards east from Kochi, you have development and nature living in harmony with each other. But like the urban centers like Kochi, will have to really learn from them, not from cities like Dubai. We have a lot of people migrating to Dubai, Middle East cities like Dubai is built on a desert, and that kind of a development kind of vision cannot be. This is the time that people started realizing that Kochi cannot be Singapore, Kochi cannot be Dubai. Kochi has to be Kochi, and it has to learn from its vicinity, its urban, rural centers, which still have a lot of facilities, housing facilities, infrastructure, and in that context, I would mention about like Kochi's drainage and both wastewater and solid waste. Like we've been polluting our city with our wastewater, we've been polluting our city with our waste, and now the people start realizing that like we will have to treat them. We shouldn't really put it in our water, in our soil, and if we keep doing it, we will not be surviving. So what I'm trying to say over here is that like we are like it's this whole pandemic, COVID-19 and the climate change impact is really helping us to kind of like find answers, homegrown, localized, nature-based answers for all our problems. And in this context, I would mention about 2 critical areas. Like our city, historically we've been a center of marine export. Like one of our major economic activities, like marine wealth. We export a lot of marine wealth. We gain a lot of exchequer through our marine export. The second aspect is tourism. And like last couple of years after the first two floods, like our marine export really hit, and not only that, like now the whole world is coming to know about the quality of our water, and they started assessing the water wealth, especially the marine wealth, on the basis of the quality of water. And we are getting a lot of negative report from our importers that you have to improve the quality. And second part is the tourism, since we don't really have good water, good food, and good environment, good open space, we should tourists come over here and spend. They don't really want to see the built kind of heritage alone, and they really want to the natural heritage. They really want to kind of indulge in the natural aspect of living over here. They want to really live with the people. So they are giving more importance to the intangible and natural heritage than the built heritage or historical relics. So and like the city is like in a critical juncture to decide whether you go with the kind of the Dubai-centric kind of development over here, or you'll have to have your own kind of sustainable development that would help not only the present but the posterity as well. So and unfortunately we are getting very interesting projects like Interact Bio by the ICLEI. It is like not and project is also helping us to conscientize the people. When we go to the people with this kind of people, it kind of stimulates thought process in them. Like you will have to have your own medicinal solutions. For instance, we had a lot of medicinal solutions for our diseases, vector-borne diseases, even COVID kind of diseases like that, and all we have lost over a period of time. And now, people are telling us to reinvent all that, and even for that an answer to COVID lies in our nature-based solution, or our flora over here. And that's what we are trying to regain through this period, through this pandemic period. And this critical juncture is going to be a real boon for us. And we are going to really learn from all the past mistakes, and we are going to correct that way. And yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your insights, Dr. Rajan. We really appreciate you being with us and sharing these, particularly around you saying, how often these things happen unplanned and not according to a specific strategy or master plan. And as you said, Kochi can't be Singapore. Kochi must find local solutions. So it's amazing to hear some of those examples from you. And finally, if I turn back to Dave, perhaps a bit of a contrasting question here. Can you tell us and share some insights around the development of Manchester's new biodiversity strategy? How is it being developed, and how will the strategy enable the city to contribute to achieving the targets in the global framework? I think you may be on mute, Dave.
Sorry, yeah, we're very excited about this project, and it aligns with everything that Rajan said about living in harmony with nature. It's about doing things differently. I think this is our chance to do things differently. And in the past, our focus on biodiversity has maybe been driven by city as officers, without engaging with wider stakeholder networks and without other professionals. And I think we're doing things differently this time in Manchester. We're engaging collaboratively with an environmental charity, and we've relinquished control, which is quite difficult in local government or in any government, to relinquish control and say to somebody, you may be better placed to help shape a new vision for biodiversity in the city. So we've done that, and we're working collaboratively with environmental charities to help shape that new vision for city biodiversity in Manchester. And we've come up with a project, a 4-year project, which is called My Wild City. And again, it's perfectly timed in these incredible, challenging times that we're in. We've seen how important nature can be to communities and citizens. What we tried to do, I think it's important as a policy officer for me to say the importance for us is about having a plan. I can't emphasize enough, if there's one thing that everybody goes away with, think about having a plan, because it allows you to demonstrate where you want to go and where you want to be and how you're going to get there. And I think linking agendas and themes is really important as well. So although biodiversity is a standalone theme, it links so importantly to other agendas, especially in this light in relation to health and well-being, for example. So our project is called My Wild City, and we've recently undergone a significant consultation where over 2,000 citizens got in touch with us and stated how important nature was to them. And 90% of people who responded said they felt that it was important to be part of something, important to be part of a movement, and wanted to get involved locally. So again, that gives us the mandate to look at things differently. What we're able to do as well is, this is hot off the press news, is during lockdown, we've undertaken a survey with citizens around valuing nature nearby, how local nature helped people of Manchester to get beyond and get through coronavirus lockdown. Over 1,000 people responded to that survey, and 99% of people said that being able to connect with nature was incredibly important to them. And nearly 70% of people said they valued nature more now than ever. And don't take my word for it. Let me just give you a couple of quotes from people who responded to that survey, because I think we can have all the statistics and all the reports, but sometimes words really speak strongly. And just a couple of quotes from that lockdown survey. Not me, but some of our citizens. I realised I needed to get out more. Even before lockdown, I stayed in far too much. I've changed all that. Nature is saving my life. And another quote, public parks have come into their own and will save the nation. And I think we need to take advantage of these opportunities, and that people are recognising the importance that local nature can play in their lives. And our new biodiversity, which we're going to help shape, so it's a pitch to everybody who's listening. Help us to shape our city vision. We're a member of the Cities with Nature network. We want to develop the best new biodiversity strategy in an urban environment that we can do. And we want as much involvement and as much impetus to that, as much input to that as we can do. So it's a call out to anybody who wants to get involved and help us in shaping that new vision. But it's really important for us to involve people creatively on that journey. And I think that's what our new biodiversity strategy will do. It will link these different agendas. So very much what Rajan was saying earlier as well, we've got river valley focused studies, we've got a project called Our Rivers, Our City, which will feed into the biodiversity strategy. And again, what we're trying to do is put a spotlight onto these different agendas, but link them all. And I think it makes the compelling case, certainly to local government, that people care about nature and people want to be involved. I think over 3,000 people there have got involved in these two relevant surveys, and that provides us with the mandate to turn this policy into practical action.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. And I just want to take this moment to thank both our panelists, Dr. Rajan and Dave Barlow, for being with us. It's been a fantastic webinar, and to hear your insights. And so really just to express our thanks and gratitude for being with us today. I am going to, at this point, open the floor for any questions and discussions. So for our attendees, if I can ask those panelists, even from the previous panel, Anita and Jess, and even Ingrid, if you could perhaps put your videos on if you're still with us. We'll invite some questions from the floor. So if anyone has a question, as I said before, you could please raise your hand using the panel on the right, or make use of the question box. And I see there is actually one in the question box that I'd like to field to Ingrid, if I may. This is from Sonigitu in Nigeria, who is asking, firstly, greetings from Calabar. please kindly elaborate on the effectiveness of the International Convention and its mainstreaming at subnational and local levels where the biodiversity is found. And I think this question is also touching on, why do we have disaggregated conservation activities in Africa, and why is that important at the local level? So Ingrid, if I may ask you to respond.
Sure, thanks. It's a really great question, and I'll do my best to respond. I mean, particularly, keeping in mind I work for ICLEI, not for the CBD, but I think that if we look at the effectiveness of the convention at subnational level, what has been interesting, ICLEI has recently done a bit of a desktop survey in reflecting on where we're wanting to go. We also looked at what have we achieved over the past decade since the adoption of Decision 1022 and the Plan of Action. And it's been absolutely incredible to see what is what has actually been achieved on the ground from big metropolitan cities to smaller villages to provinces. And these things range from grand programs and schemes to very small local almost community-based initiatives that would either involve an aspect around maybe biodiversity and food or livelihoods, how they harvest natural resources, cultural activities and experiences. So a very wide range of projects and programs. But also we've seen a lot of the cities in the States have developed local biodiversity strategies and action plans. And I think the point that Dave made around having a plan is so important. And I know that from the work that's happened in Kochi as well, that you certainly see where we have successes, it's because the city governments, I think there's a number of criteria, but often it's around that they have a very clear vision, a clear plan on the one hand. On the other hand, and I think Dr. Rajan referred to this around how to involve your stakeholders, that it's everybody's work, and it's we're needing to get everybody to sort of pull together here. Of course, having a plan also helps one in terms of setting what is your baseline. So if you know where you want to go, what do you have at the moment? And then the issue of being able to measure your progress. Are you doing the right thing? Is it working? The survey, Dave, that you talked about, I found was very interesting. That's measuring. So how is this affecting? And that then influences the next iteration of the plan or the policies and the things. And we've seen lots of resources and guidelines and toolkits and things come out. One of these is a guideline that ICLEI was involved in that we did for the CBD, specifically on the one I showed in my presentation on NBSAPs. And it's been interesting to note that the group on leading subnational governments towards the Aichi biodiversity targets are doing an assessment among their members. These are provinces and states from around the world on how the provincial and state level governments have actually used biodiversity strategies and action plans and how they've improved coordination. And what was so interesting to me was, or certainly from the perspective of where ICLEI is coming from, is to see to what extent that subnational level of government is involving also cities and municipalities and local authorities. So I think that there are, although it's not always recorded that well, and I think that's one of the problems with the current biodiversity framework, and I know that the CBD in its monitoring framework is trying to address that. And I think that is why there's so much emphasis on the role that local and subnational governments can play. Certainly what we're seeing is that there's a huge amount of work already being done, and we're seeing that the cities and states and provinces are saying, we want to help more. We want to make a commitment, recognize us, let's report on these things. If you look at the country reports that are submitted to the CBD, many of them don't actually say much about subnational governments, but we know, we can see from Cities with Nature, from our engagement through projects in cities, from webinars like these, that there's a lot that is happening. I hope I've answered that part of the question. I think the second part of the question had to do with why is it necessary to disaggregate? Well, I think that both of our previous speakers, and also from the experience that we've had in projects like Interact Bio, which is being implemented globally, but also the UNA projects in Africa, is that it is at the local level where the impact is felt most directly on the one hand, but on the other hand, this is where we live, where we eat, where we work, where we recreate, where we meet, where we waste, where we use. And this is where we can have the greatest impact. We can have amazing plans and programs at the national level, but if we don't address it and conserve our biodiversity and restore our ecosystems so that they're healthy and functioning, no amount of grand plans at the national level or global level is going to make much difference. We can't just do things in national parks that are out there far away. We have to do it, and I think that was what was so great from both our two speakers. It has to be here in our city or in our village. I hope I've responded. I don't know, it looks like Dave and Dr. Rajan are both wanting to come in and say something here as well.
Is there anything to add? You're welcome to come in, Dr. Rajan or Dave.
I just back that up, really. I think it is really important that like I said, we translate the policies and the strategies into practical action on the ground at a local level. That's how we, build confidence, get support, build trust and confidence within our community, not just within our communities and with our citizens, within our businesses, within all the stakeholders, with our cities, within our villages, within our towns. It's all about sort of like demonstrating that this contributing locally can really has a positive impact across the city, across the country. It's that collectivism, really. Behaviour change is what we want to do and take people on that journey. And we can do that by demonstrating practically on the ground and saying, this is what a park looks like, and this is what a climate resilient park looks like, and it's so much better for all these other reasons. And again, it's people can get that and understand it if they can physically touch it and see it and feel it.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, I'll add this, like in our context, especially in the South Asian context, like every kind of action has to be like with a long-term vision and for a long-term kind of sustainable living rather than short-term kind of profit. It's political profit and business profit. I don't know, whatever. All our kind of development is driven by short-term political or economic profit. I think it's the time that we go to revisit that, and we should have long-term kind of benefit for the entire universe. What we do in Kochi is not just going to affect Kochi alone. It's going to the moment we pollute the backwater over here, it's going to pollute the entire state of Kerala, the Arabian Sea. In that way, it's going to even affect the African continent. So we will have to have that kind of global kind of perspective, national policies, local action, but everything kind of should be not profit-oriented, political or economic or corporate, but people-centric.
Absolutely. And I know we're running out of time. I'm going to come back to Dave with a question that's come through the chat box. But before I do, there's a question from Amal in Kampala. And I wonder if I could direct this. Firstly, just get some brief insights from Jason and Anita. Amal is working with the Omoro district in Kampala and is in the private sector and is saying that, we have some environmental bylaws, but these need further strengthening. And which paths can the private sector follow to strengthen these bylaws? So I wonder if we could expand the question more broadly and maybe just give some reflections on the role of the private sector in really, enabling the work of local and subnational governments in Africa. Jace, maybe I can start with you, just very brief reflections.
Yeah, I'll just give it a very brief one because I saw a lot of people nodding, so they probably all have inputs. So my brief one is under the multi-level governance spaces that we have been kind of organizing in Uganda in particular. We are starting to bring the private sector in. So I think One is being willing to engage in those spaces and to meet around a neutral platform. I think, enforcement of the bylaws is a major challenge in most African cities that I've been working under UNA. So there's a lot of pause and reflection needs to be brought on that. I think a lot of it has to do with capacity issues. So once again, capacity issues is such a key focal area that should gain the prominence that it deserves. But in terms of the private sector involvement, I would have to probably say it links with finance and investment. So there's a lot of opportunity that the private sector can get involved in these kind of pilot initiatives and driving the on the ground change from an investment landscape, but also I think the dialogue, the terminology the private sector world and the cities are using and all the rest of it to access some of the private funding is quite complicated to city officials. So also trying to work with cities and local governments and national governments to get that terminology and that investment language phase so that everybody is on the same page. And I think that's maybe been a big barrier for us, is accessing the private funding. So
yeah. Thanks, Jess. And Anita, do you have any reflections or things you'd like to add?
Yes, Tim, I think also just to support what you were saying about the language and technology, maybe also just to say that in our experience with Bio in Tanzania, I think the private sector involvement is hugely untapped. As we sort of got to the middle of the project, we started with a lot of and sort of the process of the product started coming out and being showcased. We had a lot of interest from private sector, but and they keen to invest, especially in, for example, showing the people bottom line and being involved in investing in and supporting through funding and otherwise. Demonstration project, for example, what Dave was just talking about, those are really powerful, and private sector are really keen to get on board. One of the challenges, I think, was a little bit hesitant to work with. I think the relationship between private sector and government needs quite a lot of facilitation. They're not so used to working together in its nature space. So I think that is sort of, we're at the beginning of the road. And I think it would be great for the likes of ICLI and other organizations to work together to help support that facilitation. So I do think it's a huge untapped, particularly in Tanzania cities, very much underrated, undertapped aspect of nature in cities.
Yeah. Thanks, Anita, for those reflections. We are running out of time, so I'm going to ask Dave to close us off on a final question that's come through. And this is from Marina, Dave, and she says, for Dave, greetings from Argyle. In your new biodiversity strategy, have you funding in place to deliver this?
Oh, what a great question. It's interesting because we haven't had funding for our iterations of our various strategies. We've used the strategies to create the policy hooks that has brought the funding in. I think there's two ways to do it. I don't think we'd have developed a plan if we'd have needed a budget from the outset. But what we found is that the strategy and the plan makes the compelling case, helps make the business case for investment. That's not to say we don't pump prime with some money, but for example, the My Wild City project in total is probably about €500,000 over 4 years, but it will yield, the return on that is going to be huge because there will be practical projects that come out of that that are based around sort of like delivering elements of the strategy itself. So there isn't a budget per se, but what we have used our strategies for is to use those as levers to bring the funding in. So for example, in a 3-year period, our green infrastructure strategy was responsible for bringing in something in the region of €80 million worth of investment into green infrastructure related projects. And that was capturing existing investment as well as additional investment. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we wouldn't have achieved the Horizon 2020 funding without having the plan that could demonstrate that we had a direction of travel that was in line with what the funding requirements were there, if that sort of that makes sense. The other thing is, just to reiterate what the panel have said, it's important that the language that we use is, can be different to different audiences. So we can use qualitative and quantitative information. The qualitative information from the public surveys that we're using, provides us with, a tangible mandate from citizens, but as well, we have developed natural capital accounts for the city and for the city region that helps provide us with some economic drivers, some economic figures that again maybe can help private sector come on board. So having a natural capital investment plan, which the city and the city region have, a natural capital account which demonstrates the value of nature-based solutions in a monetary way, is complements having those qualitative surveys and those emotive stories and quotes that can come out of a public survey.
Right.
So in answer, no, we haven't got loads of budget to start off with, but we definitely use the strategies and action plans to lever in funding to develop projects collaboratively and bring to life the strategy and the action plan. Hope that helps.
Great, thank you, Dave. And with that, unfortunately, we don't have time for any additional questions. I just want to, encourage any cities on the line to join Cities with Nature, this amazing community of practice that is growing every day. We have just reached 170 cities on the platform, which we're very proud of. And those cities, of course, include as front runners both Manchester and Kochi. So it's been wonderful to have those panelists on the line with us. You will all know from our previous webinar that we've recently launched our new local and subnational advocacy for nature website. We will be sharing the link in the follow-up email, but just to let you know, this is a one-stop shop where you can find all information regarding the roadmap to COP15 for local and subnational governments, including information on upcoming events and webinars and to watch recordings of previous ones as well. So it's my absolute pleasure to thank all of our panelists and really just express our gratitude for each of you being with us and sharing your insights. Thank you to Ingrid for your presentation and for setting the scene as well. It's been a wonderful webinar and we are so grateful to all be able to gather, albeit virtually at this moment. But we encourage you to join us again this afternoon at 3 p.m. Central African time. We will have Anita and Jess again, but we will also be joined by a new panel of cities, as well as some regional and national governments as representatives as well. So with that, I would like to thank all of our attendees for being with us and for tuning in. For those who are watching on replay, we hope that you have enjoyed this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you later today or next time in September. So with that, I will close the webinar and a huge thank you to everyone.